Hello and welcome. My name is Mark Horseman, and I am a data evangelist with Dataversity. We would like to thank you for joining today's Dataversity webinar, Reference Data versus Master Data Management. It is the latest installment in a monthly series called Data Ed Online with Dr. Peter Aiken. Just a couple of points to get us started. Due to the large number of people that attend these sessions, you will be muted during the webinar. For questions, we will be collecting them by the Q&A section. If you would like to chat with us or chat with each other, we certainly encourage you to do so. And just to note, the Zoom chat defaults to send to just the panelists, but you may absolutely switch that to network with everyone. To open the Q&A or the chat panel, you'll find the icons for those features in the bottom middle of your screen. To answer the most commonly asked question, as always, we will send a follow-up email to all registrants within a couple of business days containing links to the slides. And yes, we are recording and will likewise send a link to the recording of this session as well as any additional information requested throughout the webinar. Now, let me introduce to you our speaker for today, Dr. Peter Aiken. Peter Aiken is an acknowledged data management authority and associate professor at Virginia Commonwealth University, president of Data International, and associate director of the MIT International Society of Chief Data Officers. For more than 40 years, Peter has learned from working with hundreds of data management practices in more than 30 countries. Among his 13 books are the first on making the case for data leadership, the first focusing on data monetization and modern strategic data thinking, and the first to objectively specify what it means to be data literate. International recognition has resulted from these and a intensive worldwide event schedule. Peter also hosts the longest running data management webinar series on dataversity.net, this one right here. Before Google, before data was big, and before data science, Peter founded several organizations that have helped more than 200 businesses leverage data. Specific savings have been measured at more than $1.5 billion. His latest venture is Anything Awesome. And with that, let me turn everything over to Peter to get today's webinar started. Hello and welcome, my friend.
And hello, and welcome to you, Mark. Understand you're getting a little bit of springish weather where you are, about halfway around the
Finally.
globe from where I am. Yeah, it's about time. We're all glad for it. Well, I'm joining you all today from Vienna, Austria. It's such a thrill to be out here and to actually have a couple days that I can go and visit this wonderful town. But that's not why you're here. You're here to understand the difference. It sounds like it's a contest, reference versus master data management. Actually, it should be really reference plus master data management, but we'll work on that. Whoops, I hit too far, too fast. There we go. So just to get an idea of what we're going to cover today, we'll start out with a data management overview because these two pieces fit into that overall structure of data management very, very well. We'll then talk about what is reference versus master data management. Why are they both important? What are some building blocks that you can use to get started, and then give you some guiding principles and best practices. Finish up about an hour from now with some takeaways and a really fun part of the program that Mark and I both enjoy, getting your questions. So let's jump right in and see what we can look at. Now, data management and data in general is not broadly or widely understood. Almost everybody around the world understands the picture of the blind people missing the elephant. Again, some of them think it's different parts depending on how they encounter it, and data is exactly the same way. There are all sorts of different ways people encounter data, but the problem is most have approached data with different knowledge and skills. We don't have a core set that we've been able to get into the curriculums of programs on this. This leads me to what I always love to talk about, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It starts out, Abraham Maslow in the 50s put it out, and most of us got it in high school, where if our food, clothing, and shelter needs are unmet, then we will never be safe. If we're not safe, then we will never be part of something that is bigger than us. And if we're never part of something that's bigger than us, it's hard to know where we end and the rest of the world starts, boundary issues and things like that. And if none of those things are met, self-actualization never comes. Now, self-actualization is that part that hopefully, like you, like me, I love what I do. And so when I'm doing it, I really don't notice it as work. In fact, I kind of go, wow, they pay me to do this stuff. That's really cool. The TED people hijacked the term self-actualization a couple of years back, and they call it flow, but it's really the same type of thing. And the reason I want to show you this is because you can't get to the top level without the second level being in place, and the second level can't exist without the third, and the third can't exist without the fourth, and the fourth without the bottom level. This was Maslow's terrific insight into this. And in data, it operates kind of the same way. There's all of these things in what I call the golden triangle of data management. Notice that master data management is, in fact, one of those pieces, along with other things that we see up in there, which are really technologies more than anything else. But that just represents the tip of the iceberg in learning how all of this fits together. And that there are foundational data management practices that you see building up from the bottom. Again, these foundational practices include things that must be there first in order for other things to be there in place, just the same way as Maslow needs to have. And all of these things that I have there must be in place before you start to work on reference and master data management. So don't jump into this as your first attempt, but it is a thing that you will get to and need pretty soon. And these are all necessary but insufficient prerequisites to being successful with things up there in that top pyramid. These are capabilities, and it's important to understand them as such because they really need to be practiced by every part of your knowledge worker community in your organization. Now, people look at this chart, they get this, and they say, can you do it faster? And I say, of course we can do it faster. You can always do anything faster. However, if we do it faster, it will take longer. If we do it faster, it will cost more. If we do it faster, we will deliver less. And if we do it faster, it will present greater risk to the organization. So let's take a look at these data management building blocks that we're talking about here. And basically, it starts out upper left-hand corner. There's all sorts of wonderful data and everything that happens between when data is sourced and then data is used is part of data management. So a wonderful description of it. I like that, but it's not very operational on that. Then the real part that it doesn't contain is the idea that we don't want to just use data, but we want to reuse data. And organizing and engineering for reuse is a much more difficult proposition than is the process of just simply using data. So in order to really make use of your data, it's worth something the first time, but it's worth a lot more the second time in order to do it. This still is not a sufficient definition, though. And so I've put together things that over the years seem to make a little bit of sense to people. The idea that there's sort of two parts. There's an engineering half, if you will, which requires specialized data skills to collect, evaluate, prepare, evolve, access, and store data in there. And there's a exploitation side of the equation, which is data science, delivery, presentation, storytelling, all sorts of things along those lines. And once again, that takes care of the data use part of it, but you also have to get really understand that the formal reuse management is got to be built in as part of your data management practice. If you don't have these pieces in place, it's not at all possible to do a good job in an efficient manner. And reference and master data are essential to this entire architecture. So it's our overview of data management. Now, what are we going to talk about? What is reference and master data management? So let's first of all talk a little bit about hype. Hype, unfortunately, is something that CIOs, CDOs, CEOs feel a lot of pressure around. They're always under pressure to do something. There are a lot of promises made out there by our vendor partners, and most of the time they really end up being something that can be useful, but nevertheless is still somewhat problematic because most people do not understand the hype cycle. So the hype cycle is something that was invented by Lady Augusta Ada King, or Ada Lovelace. She's the only acknowledged daughter of Lord Byron and the person who I consider to have founded our discipline. Now, she wrote, in considering any new subject, there is frequently a tendency to first overrate what we find to be interesting or remarkable, and secondly, by a sort of natural reaction to undervalue the true state of the case. Now, in addition to this wonderful discovery that she had here about the hype cycle of things, she also is the first computer programmer. She looked at a weaving loom and said, when they create a machine that will actually read these punch cards that they were using to program the weaving loom, I will be able to make it do math. And again, hats off, absolutely brilliant. Died unfortunately at age 42 around this topic. But again, let's just look at her hype cycle here, which is there's some technology trigger that starts things off. Somebody's found something really cool, and it immediately goes up to the peak of inflated expectations. And then down into that trial of disillusionment. As she said, we first overvalue and then undervalue the actual piece of it. And the real progress occurs when we start to work our way up the slope of enlightenment towards this plateau of productivity, knowing how to apply it, knowing there's general knowledge out there. Gartner has claimed credit for this, but they really do not. As I said, it goes back to 1840. Here, however, is the Gartner hype cycle for data management for the year 2004. And they have things up here like vector databases and data products approaching the peak of inflated expectations. And those of you that have been seduced by the siren of data mesh are at least disappointed from a Gartner perspective because they consider this to be not just on the way down to the trial of disillusionment, but in fact, actually obsolete before it gets to the plateau. There's some reasons for that. We can take them at the questions and answered part. Same thing with data fabric. It's not quite as death sentencey as the other parts are, but nevertheless, they're headed down. What metadata management solutions, again, we've kind of turned the corner on that and we're starting to get better. And here is where our master data management fits in, right in here with a data lake, which most of you may not realize is a relatively new development. We've gotten good with data lakes. We ought to be able to get good with master data management now. If you're seeing this for the first time, this is the DAMA data management body of knowledge. And we have a section you can see I've circled in yellow there for reference in master data management being one of the 11 practice areas that we put as part of data management in general. Just a quick note on this, when they're trying to implement this, they're often trying to do it by one wedge at a time. And it actually works better if you do it in combinations of 3 at a time to be able to do this. Again, we can hit that at the questions and answer pieces when we get to that stage. So let's dump into the definitions. Reference data management is control over the defined domain values. These are the vocabularies that your database is allowed to speak. It's standardized terms, code, values, other unique identifiers, and business definitions for each value so that you have them sorted and sourced as far as all that goes, making sure that we use them consistently across the entire organization. For example, at one point in time, I like to tell a story about Toyota, which at the time wasn't able to tell the difference between a current customer and a potential customer. And they often sent their current customers information that said that the car that you bought last week is now on sale, which was just probably not a great business practice at the time. I'm sure they've gotten better than that. But nevertheless, these reference data pieces are going to be important because then you can start to explain to management there's an important concept here. If we don't have these things sorted out, then how do we deal with the concept of an ex customer? Is an ex customer a current customer or a potential customer? By the way, we don't have a value for that in this particular webinar. That's going to depend on your business conditions. But we also might want to look at customers and divide them up into residential and commercial customers. And again, this could be a way of defining these customers so that you would be selling commercial sales to commercials and residential sales to residential customers as far as all that goes. There's one other piece that goes into here too. Well, what if we want to treat somebody as a VIP? How do we do that without this type of a structure here? So reference data is the idea of classifying these domains. Again, one of the fun parts about all this is that, well, in Hungary right now, you can see here are 3 different definitions of the way Czechoslovakia was defined from a map perspective on here. And again, important as far as making sure we understand what we're talking to when we talk about a particular geographic region, or an order status might be new, in progress, closed, or canceled. The post office, there's a wonderful comedy routine about the 5 people it took to create the 2-state USPS code abbreviations. And even today, in spite of all the work that the post office has attempted to do, they have not been given the permission to do the one thing that will help the most with their data, which is create a zip code level identification system throughout their entire system. If you can imagine such a thing, it was never designed, it's never been implemented. It's one of the things that's holding the post office back more than anything else in the world, a master and reference data problem. There are then data sets that we put together for our organizations. Here's another one that occurs fairly often. You'll see the US listed as US for United States, but you'll see GB standing for Great Britain for the United Kingdom, not UK. And if, of course, you're sending things from one place to another, you put the wrong codes in, or you allow them somehow to get into the system, you'll have problems with delivery and supply chain types of things. So that's what reference data is. Master data now comes from a idea that we had in the old days of updating master files. And it's the idea that we have business entities that give us context for the transactions that are occurring. Business rules dictate format and allowable range, focusing mainly on parties and locations around these things. They, again, as I said, provide context for the transactions and come from the term master file. Master file worked like this. You might start your day off with a balance of 100 and you go to buy a sandwich for lunch. And if you can find a sandwich for $5 these days, you're doing great. And that goes into a transaction file, as does the original master balance, which makes through an update program process, a new balance for you of $95 and checks for any errors that come out on the other side of this. So this was the process of updating a master file. Let me put the two of these together now. Reference versus master data. The reference data in this example, you can see that in the days prior, there were 9 gender codes mandated by law that the Canadian Social Security system used at this point in time. This comes from a lawsuit I was involved in, a lot of fun stories around that. But you can see it was male, female, formerly male, now female, formerly female, now male. Uncertain won't tell, doesn't know, male soon to be female, and female soon to be male. Right. The FBI decided those were good enough for them, so the FBI used those same gender codes for a period of time. The fact that we maintain 9 gender codes is reference data. There isn't a 10th one. There are no alternatives. There is nothing else that fits into these categories of defining, in this case, the gender codes. Now, whether that's right or wrong is another question, but this is what's in the system. So this is what people have to take care to maintain. The master data, however, is what controls the values. So in other words, the fact that any individual, in this case, the customer Pat for the Canadian Social Security system, would have one of these 9 values assigned to that individual would be the use of master data. Both of these, of course, provide context for the transaction data. One to say this is specifying one of 9 gender codes, and then master data saying it is this particular one. So when we look at these definitions of master data, we're really trying to get to a golden version for these data values. And the golden version is the golden master, is kind of like the master data set that you have, or the master record that you're going to cut. It provides a really good, the one that you should use, as opposed to one that you might think might be the right one, but you don't want to be uncertain about that sort of thing. Uh, by the way, MDM also stands for mobile device management, just another crazy use of the acronyms that are in there. So Gartner correctly holds that MDM is a discipline or a strategy. And that is really important. It's not just a technical solution, but it's a way of adopting this approach to managing data. But it's sold as a technology solution or a silver bullet. And those are unfortunate. That's where we get into the hype cycle. Too many people spend money on buying software without getting the rest of the picture that goes into place. Again, it's the official set of identifiers for parties, places, and things that are in there. Now, I'm going to give you 2 minutes of a really interesting piece of AI hype around this. And this is a data scientist named Hannah Fry, and it's titled Why You Should Be Polite to an AI.
There is actually a really good reason why you should say please and thank you to your chatbots. And it's not just so that AI will spare you when the apocalypse comes. Okay, I'm sure you've seen all sorts of posts telling you what prompt to use to get the most out of your language model. I think you can pretty much forget all of that because there's only really one important thing to remember, which is that the AI that we have now is really, really, really good at role playing. So you shouldn't talk to it like it's a Google search or like you're trying to extract information from it as though it's Wikipedia. Instead, You should talk to it as though it's an improvisational actor that can be any character imaginable. And the reason for this is that large language models, they don't store facts like it's a database, right? They generate responses dynamically based on having read everything that humans have ever written and the prompt that you give it. And that means that AI, the stuff we have now, it doesn't have this stable identity, right? It doesn't have a fixed worldview, it doesn't have personal beliefs. And so if you prompt it in a particular way, it will respond in kind. If you try and prompt it as though it's a Shakespearean bard, then it will give you a flowery response. If you try and prompt it as though it is an extremely effective and smart scientist, it will give you the relevant response. But if you prompt it as though it's an encyclopedia, it's going to try and sound like one, but it's still just performing a role, and you've effectively just restricted what it can do. So instead, what you should do is you should imagine that you're a film director, right? And that you have a character in mind, and then you should prompt your AI accordingly. So don't say, give me 3 interesting facts about science. Say, you are a world-renowned scientist with PhDs in biology and chemistry and physics, and your nephew says that science is boring. You only have a few minutes, and you've got to give him counterexamples. What extraordinary stories do you use? And here is the big idea, right? If you are working with a character and you want that character to eagerly help you, whoever they are, it's probably better to be polite.
Now, that was some of the most insightful 2 minutes of learning I've done about AI in the past 5 years that I've been working with it. And I want you all to take this in mind as well. I'm going to show you some examples from Gemini, which is the Google version of this, on how to work with this. But the key to this is to, again, not just ask Google, how do I tell what's the difference between reference and master data? Notice it gives us very good responses here. I'm certainly not going to read all of this to you here, but it is instead better to say, okay, I'm either a manager who knows nothing about reference and master data, but you are the expert. And I want you to give me the 3 core differences between it, or the 16 different ways, or whatever. So no, this is the encyclopedia approach that you get. If you instead try to put the persona on this, the chatbots have very good information about what's in here about reference and master data. So I'm trying to encourage you all to use this in your daily lives here as well, in order to do this. So let's keep moving on. What now we're looking at is, why are they important? And this is a really good diagram from my colleague, Dr. Chris Bradley, who starts off with this little yellow piece in the upper right-hand corner that you just saw the sparkles around. And it says reference data controls accessible data values, such as what countries are we doing business in? What types of accounts are available? Does the concept of VIP customers exist within our systems? What are the controlled vocabulary items that we have? And that then leads us to larger values, not a whole lot larger, master values. Are you a member of our premium club? Are you an authorized user? Do you have the use of common data structures within this? This controls access to system capabilities. And then this last piece is all the rest of the data, like the $5 I spent on the sandwich, like whether I'm authorized, or in fact, if I just liked a picture somewhere. So again, thanks to Dr. Chris for allowing me to use this. He's got some really great resources. Master data management can make data governance a whole lot easier. Unfortunately, the way many organizations approach it is the way I'm going to describe it now. It's the first year. They are looking at a one-legged stool, again, just the technology aspect of what's going on. And they put it in, the users don't know do it. In fact, I hear as I'm walking the halls of this particular organization, I didn't know where else to put the data, so I stuck it in the MDM. It's just the kind of thing that makes me hang my head and say, no, we clearly have failed at implementing this in this organization. So after some work, they redo the over piece. They started again. This, by the way, was after they'd spent $30 million on it in here. And they looked at root cause analysis, came up with a consensus that poor data quality was there, as well as inadequate training. And once again, the organization went, oh my God, we've got to do data quality. So get data qualitying, whatever that happens to be. And again, the inexperience with data management, data quality, technology focus, and a pure data quality approach to this did not give them that 3-legged stool that they need to have. It's always people, process, and procedures here, interdependencies. very important to understand. Data governance makes the case for and is responsible for the data quality. Data quality is necessary but insufficient prerequisite for success. And master data, in this case, is the capabilities constraining the data governance effectiveness. Remember, I said to use these things in groups of 3. Here's a couple of examples to look at it. By the way, consultants, I get very frustrated with them, even though I'm a consultant myself, because they like to use big words like methodology. The word methodology actually means the study of methods, so don't let them fool you. We're really saying the way we do this. And a real practical way to do it is to look at those 3-legged stools and select those 3 areas. Reference might be one of them. Data quality might be another. And then again, third one here might be data governance. It's going to depend. Don't take this as gospel that it's going to work for your organization. I don't know enough about your organization to do this, but you do. And so you can look at these things and see what's particularly important. Let me give you a very specific example. Here's an organization that started off by looking at implementing a master data solution in this case, but the vocabulary that they were using was critically important. And the only key to this was that every sale in the ERP that they purchased was taken as a retail sale. And yet not every sale was a retail sale in this case. So for example, they had gasoline or oil that they'd put into things and containers, and that was fine. That was one way of selling it. But moving it from a tank to a tanker truck, or from a boat, or from a plane to various things. These are all different ways of doing it. And the organization, by careful use of master data management, was able to implement the ERP without customization by simply making sure that nobody was allowed to use the word tank absent some valid controlled vocabulary qualifier. It was a storage tank. It was a mobile tank. It was a gasoline tank. Again, you can see even those are not enough. They had some very precise things worked out, but they did it in a fantastic way. And this saved them literally tens of millions of dollars the second time around, by the way, that they were doing all of this work. Of course, we could also get it confused with this kind of a tank here, which is another type entirely. So master and reference data tends to exist in multiple places around our organization. I'm just making up an example here, but you can see that in this case, lots of different things need to be connected to lots of other things in order to make them work. The real challenge around this is not to look at it from that perspective, but instead to say, okay, if we had the ability to do it properly, what we really want to do is have a business steward that maintains code management. And again, these are the master data values, the reference data values that go into the database of record, and that we have these systems connect up with all the other systems. By the way, this can be done on-prem or in the cloud. There's no real difference as far as that goes. And every time we bring in additional data, we screen it for this reference or master data characteristics. Same type of architecture here for master data. Again, we have one source of this that controls the use of this data throughout the rest of the organization. And like I said, there's lots and lots of packages you can purchase to do this. Here's a combined reference and master data architecture here, again, showing exactly the same thing. Systems of record for the various records, they know what they've got. But there's another part of master data management that you need to understand, and that is that it has to work in conjunction with your existing business processes. It has to work at the cadence, the rhythm, the operational the operations of your existing system. So most organizations go through some form of change in all of this, where you have lots and lots of tasks that you're looking at. The industrial revolution got us one task to one person. We keep it very, very normalized from that sense perspective. But when we look at it, things from a process orientation, we may find that of those 12 tasks, only 3 of them have any value that is added to the overall process, and that we can eliminate most of the rest of these tasks, which means we can reunify the tasks into a coherent business process. It also says that if you're putting in reference or master data, that you probably need to look at reorganizing your business practices as well. But if you don't at least identify them, your master data management solution will not work under any circumstances. So again, we had one system that had all the information on one screen for a customer service rep. And they were looking at a ERP to save money, but that system had the same information spread across 23 separate screens. I don't know about you, but I don't know any knowledge worker that can keep track of information spread across 23 separate screens. It's just a crazy nuts proposition, but unfortunately, it's mostly discovered after somebody tries to implement this and it doesn't work. There are some wonderful technologies for going in and obtaining automated business process discovery. And again, very, very clever algorithms that can go in, produce reasonable maps, flows, things that show you where all the various processes are. My favorite example of this, however, is because I drive a Prius. Actually, my second Prius now at this point. The first one lasted 300,000 miles. So I took on Toyota for their customer management, but the cars work really great. So here's our traditional engine, again, just sort of running. And everybody for years and years has been trying to figure out a better way of doing this. Well, Toyota came up with it at the Prius. And what it was not the situation where you should have either an electric engine or a gasoline engine. At the time, it was most efficient to put two of them together. There was an engine and a electric motor. And both of these things were controlling inputs and outputs to the battery and to the wheels. It's a little bit more complicated than that today, but you can see here from this diagram, Toyota really cracked the code by saying, look, I'm putting electricity in here, and now I'm putting brakes on, so now I'm going to put more electricity back into here. As I go back and forth between the various driving operations, it was a matter of changing the level of granularity. We were not going to do either electricity or electric. We're going to do the best of both. And my wonderful Prius got 40 miles to the gallon for 300,000 miles and 20 years worth of work. It was certainly a reasonable investment as far as that goes. Now, here's a really interesting one. I asked, again, this Gemini product here, how would we come up with a scenario of a large retail company with multiple sales channels, brick and mortar, and look at this context in data management? Well, how would reference and master data management solve this situation and save money? They don't have to know anything about your environment. I guarantee some of you, this makes perfectly good sense to. So once again, I'm not going to read the entire package here, but it is a wonderful way of using AI to come in and append and extend the types of activities that you're looking at from a master data management activity. So again, reference and master data management are necessary but insufficient prerequisites to getting a lot of other things done in this area. The nice part is that it's reasonably mature, as I showed you with the hype cycle. It's working its way up. It's very, very, got a lot of things that are in particular there. So then goals and principles is provide a authoritative source of reconciled high quality master and reference data. The average organization has their customer data stored across 13 separate systems. If you can reduce that to any number less than 13, you are above average. The goal, of course, of a reference and master data solution is to have it in one. This helps lower the cost through reuse and leverage of the standard efforts and supports business intelligence and integration, analytics, all the rest of your activities that go on here. There's a lot of different components that go into here. I'm not going to go through each of these, but there are some very good, again, you get all these slides. So of course, you'll be able to go back and reference them later, but it's the idea of being able to define these various components of the architecture and match them to your existing process architecture. If you don't have them matched to your process architecture, all this work here is absolutely for naught. All right, so who needs the information? What data sources are going to be available? How does the data from the different sources differ? Can we reconcile the inconsistencies? How do we share values? These are just some of the types of questions that you're going to be asking. Each one is going to be dependent upon your specific situation. We know how to do data management. We're not sure how your organization needs to do it. That's where you are the expert, but you can take this set of guidance here and feed it into ChatGPT or Gemini or whatever your particular AI favorite is, and it will start to give you more specific detail around what type of cleaning services that you need to have, what type of documentation can be produced by the AI that you can then edit in order to come up with, that you can start to implement this golden record and create quality reports around all of this. There's basically three groups of people that are involved in this, although they're not exclusive to just these, but you're going to have steering committees and business stewards, governance people, people that are working with your subject matter experts, data consumers, standards and private providers, et cetera, et cetera. You're going to have different types of consumers that are going to be out there. Some of the times your consumer is another business process. Sometimes it's another IT system. Sometimes it's an individual. And again, different participants in there. Once again, I'll leave that to you to figure out what works best for your organization. But I do want to spend a minute on the technology piece here, because while I've told you several times that lots of organizations can go out, and there are many that will sell you master data management solutions on this, you could build it yourself. And that's actually a better way to approach it. So you're going to need a little bit of ATL. Again, they talk about master data applications, but you'll see here in just a little bit, it's not that sophisticated. It does help to have data modeling and process modeling tools. Again, remember, you need to have the process modeling matching up with the data modeling pieces on all of that. You're going to have some sort of repository for metadata. And again, some people think, oh my gosh, that's a six-figure investment. Nah, it's actually okay to use a single web page as your metadata repository. And by that, I mean, you can put the definition out there at a place that everybody on your intranet can get access to it. And all they need to do is use the browser to look up a term, and it'll go find that particular term. Again, it's a wonderful low-cost model of implementing these things so that you learn about your requirements while getting some value from the process without spending a huge amount of money and requiring a large return on investment up front. If you haven't explored data profiling tools, there's lots of those. Those are available as a service now. And of course, lots of integrated tools have them out there within cleansing and integration, et cetera, et cetera. If you have specific business rules, those of you in the finance sector and in healthcare in particular, there's an awful lot that business process rules can help as well. Finally, we need some change management tools to be able to pull all of this together. The key, like I said, is that most organizations tend to start out and buy an integrated solution. And of course, the moral of that is that a fool with a tool is still a fool. We have so many people that just try and try and try and do not have success with this because they don't have the right background in order to do this. There are some very well-regarded master data management vendors here. I just put a couple of them up on all of this that have gotten very, very good. Some of them are definitely worth looking into. But as I said, that should be your second phase of this. Your first phase should be BYF. You say, of course, what do you mean, BYF? Build your first master data management solution. You'll learn so much about the process that you'll be able to have an articulate conversation with the vendors of these tools, as opposed to going out, spending lots of money, once again, having a large makeup, a large return on investment that you have to get to in order to come up with these things. It is just nuts when I see this. So let's just take the example here of a hospital trying to define what physicians have what admitting privileges to what parts of the hospital. Now, they were offered, again, one of these seven-figure master data management solutions here, and correctly, their CEO said, what do I get for my return on investment? Now, don't get me wrong. I believe that you can achieve these, but it might take you 2, 3, 4 years. And many CEOs are not willing to invest in that on the promise that they may not be around in 2, 3, 4 years to do this. So they're looking for a quicker way of learning about this and helping gauge their needs. Every organization out there has some kind of SQL Server database. And we take system one that has the admitting privileges, and we put the master data on this SQL server so that whenever system one needs to find out the golden source of admitting privileges for Dr. X, it can go back to that SQL server and ask that. That's easy. I guarantee you have people in your organization who are fully capable of building a very robust system that will do exactly this process. You, of course, repeat for system 2. And once again, you have lather, rinse, and repeat. You can see where it's going here. We've got 3 systems now that are all accessing that. That means we've eliminated 2 redundant systems that are out there. So already we should be seeing some savings. We should be seeing some interesting rule making that goes on. And how do we determine what do we really mean by admitting privileges in this instance, et cetera, et cetera. As you get mature about the process, you can then start to implement a more robust solution, perhaps an enterprise service bus that allows us to connect up to systems 1, systems 2, and systems 3. But then eventually we're going to add more systems to this, and we only have to add them by type of system in here, because now that we've defined the access rules and defined the metadata and defined the golden master data, this system, of course, is much neater and much easier, much lower tech cost to do than this. Once you have this up and running, then it makes sense to look at the vendor options and say, okay, would a 7-figure investment actually be profitable compared to what I'm spending in order to do this? So you see what I'm saying? It's not just about technology, it's about people and process here as well. And again, then it may be worthwhile to evaluate that 7-figure package and see whether it goes into it. Let's look at a couple of other ways that master data management falls into organizational pieces. Again, these things are inextricably intertwined implementations. So if we're doing knowledge management and data quality engineering, master data is probably a piece of this in order to pull it all together to make sure that our operational data works as smoothly as possible and that our operations work as smoothly as possible. Or if we're looking here at some sort of different types of data scanning and data harvesting things. So we can look at all of these things, but you can see master data management practices and data monitoring is very important in order to do this. So I asked Gemini again, what are the important considerations here? Well, once again, I think it gave very good advice. No guarantee of success. Focus on your needs. Look at specific industry pieces, vendor case studies, customer reviews, et cetera, et cetera. But unlike what I did here, which is asking for a specific response from a encyclopedia type thing, go ahead and say, I work at a manufacturing company, medium-sized manufacturing company, and I'm looking specifically for areas that in a medium manufacturing company, you can come in as a consultant. This is asking the AI, come in as a consultant and recommend me specific case studies where I can go learn more about it, or some other company that's implemented it, and I can call them up and say, how'd it go? If you're not in a competitive situation, you might be able to do that for them. So let's look at guiding principles and best practices. And just like all large IT projects, there are huge failure rates that are out there, just lots and lots of numbers that go into this. It's just like anything in IT. We oversell, we overpromise, we don't actually come up with most pieces that are there. But when we look at the root causes, again, 30% are failures. A lot of them are linked up with service-oriented architectures or microservices in here. But really the causes of failure are not because the technology doesn't work. It's because leadership doesn't understand what they're trying to do. They implement it as a project. It's a ERP or enterprise data warehouse. It's an IT effort. It's separate from data governance and separate from data quality. That the initiatives are implemented with old incorrect technology. And again, I'm saying SQL Server here, guys, so it's not that hard to do, but you want to be careful. It's not going to work on Access, for example, that you've got internal politics that are going to be problematic about it at all. Now, all of these come together with lots and lots of different success factors here as well. And again, these are sort of top 15 of them here. I won't read them all to you, but you can see basic, whoop, I'm so sorry, I'm going to go back. He said he's going to go back. There we go. The key to this is to understand it's not a project, that it's not going to be something that you're going to do and then be done with. There is an implementation phase that's important. I described it to you a little bit earlier here, but that this becomes now a way of doing things so that the next pile of data, the next new things that you get a hold of are in fact available for the rest of the organization to be able to use, and that you can take this learning with you and do things here Yes, of course, you're always going to need high-level sponsorship and all that sort of stuff. No problems with that. But the goal is, can we achieve a single view of some pieces of master data? And then once we've got those pieces working well, can we expand the scope in order to do that? So again, active leadership, holistic, et cetera, et cetera. It's just really, really important to make sure that these things line up with your business practices, because if they don't, it's going to be a problem. So from a guiding principles perspective, shared master and reference data belongs to the organization. I consider data ownership to be one of the most harmful concepts that exists out there. And I know that rubs some people the wrong way, but when somebody says, I own this data, then it doesn't belong to the organization. And that's really not the way to look at it. It's been the number one cause of failure in many of the companies that I've had remediation efforts with. It's, again, ongoing, so we're not going to achieve it by one project alone. It's going to be an ongoing effort, and we're going to try to get these things. Make sure that your entry point is low enough. Let's just say that you have 5 $100,000 a year resources working on master data management. I believe it's incumbent on the organization to be able to show that they have achieved more than $500,000 in savings by the end of that first year. Some people, like I said, they want to invest 7, sometimes 8 figures. Like I said, the one I've seen most is when one that's had several failures to the $30 million tune on all this. That you have to have a reasonably competent set of stewards in order to do this. You're not going to be able to do this with green people. They need to be empowered to determine the golden values, and that these golden values represent the best sources that you have out there. And that from that point onwards, master data values are replicated, not duplicated, but replicated only from golden sources. So we have controlled release, as opposed to everything jumping out all at once and people simply making copies of things. And that reference data changes require formal change management. That's not an IT concept. It's not a data management specific concept, but it is a discipline for which we have an absolutely well qualified group of individuals that we can put together in order to do all of these things. So a wonderful way of looking at these things and saying, hey, now that we're going to expand our operations into another part of the world, we're adding some new things. Remember, not UK, but GB for Great Britain, right? Little minor things like that. We've got to make sure that we have all of that in place. This next example that I'm going to show you here is absolutely what I consider the most brilliant articulation of how to explain master data management in under a minute. Now, the story here is that a colleague of mine, Dave Evans, a number of years ago, was trying to get British Telecom to implement some forms of master data management. And he wanted to have a way of explaining this. And he invested a little bit in a cute little bit of animation here. Like I said, it's under a minute, but it is a absolutely phenomenal demonstration of this. And then what he did was he attached this little video that you can see here, a little bit of animation, to an email that came from the chairman of British Telecom. And it went to every individual. Now, have you ever seen, first of all, a CEO send out something about technology? Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Sometimes people listen to it, sometimes they don't. They were able to track the number of openings of this, the number of times it was played, which was far greater than the number of employees in British Telecom. And when they did follow-ups, they were able to go back and find out that their people had actually absorbed this. So their name for the project here, obviously you can see, was Seven Sisters. And when they went back and asked people questions, people were able to name some of the Seven Sisters from just having watched this one video. So again, I'm going to play it for you here twice. If you want to get a copy of it, it's out there on my website. You can certainly grab it from there and take a look. But anyway, thanks to Dave here. So we're going to do it once real quick. What a wonderful little video. And again, you're welcome to take it and use it for your own organization because the message is exactly the same. Previously, information was stored around our customer place in lots of different places. People were doing duplicate work. It was a bit messy, great typical understatement there. And now we're sorting all of our data into 7 sisters, 7 sets of master data. And they have done extremely well. One more time, real quick. What an absolutely wonderful way to articulate this. It's the most requested artifact that I get. I collect these things, by the way. If you have any that you'd like to contribute, I'd love to get them and make them available to the rest of the community in just this fashion in order to do this. So another question for Gemini here, your typical AI. What approach is better? Well, there is no universal approach. And again, these guys have really good data in them. There is hallucinations that occur. You can't rely on it 100%, but by golly, it's a great place to start on this. I actually did this for one where I was working with a very large retail organization, and I said specifically to it, I'm a long-suffering manager inside of company X, and I want to know which approach is going to work. And the system was able to tell me information about the company that I don't think even the company was aware was on the outside. It's amazing how much these things will find. So depending on how complex your requirements are, how big budget that you have, what time to value that you have, do you have any internal expertise, and do you have a long-term strategy? Because again, if it's not guided by this long-term strategy, it's going to be extremely difficult to have any sort of success with this thing. You might build the right solution to the wrong requirements. And I've seen that happen, unfortunately, way too many times here as well. So again, keep an eye up on these things. It's very useful in terms of it. So we've talked about how data management needs to have this reference and master data management as a component of it. What are they? It's managing the values, the controlled vocabulary that we're using for the people, places, and locations that we have in our people, items, and locations that we have within our purview of looking at this. Think of it as a component of the Zachman framework. And why are they important? Well, if you don't have them managed in one place, then the chances of it being high quality is much less. Much easier to manage one source of customer data than it is to manage 13, which again is the average number of places that your typical organization has this data stored. That there are a number of really good building blocks out there, and that you could do this on your own without having to start by buying a lot of hardware and software and consulting services. Again, it's not really rocket science. What we're trying to do is figure out how can we get one piece of data to be prevalent throughout the entire organization so that every part of the organization can go and access wherever this data is in order to get it. But at the same time, making sure that when we do that, it matches up with our business process architecture. Again, I can't emphasize that component enough. If it doesn't match your British, if there's a mismatch between your master data management solution and your architecture, your process architecture, no matter how good the technology is, it will not satisfy your business needs on this. We talked a little bit about guiding principles and best practices, but really the best way to do it is for you to become an educated consumer of what master data management will do for your organization by implementing small, easy to build trials and learning so that then you can have an articulate conversation with the vendors and talk to them about all of these pieces. So I'm going to finish here tonight then with the context models that we put in the DIMBOK, and this one, of course, for reference and master data here. And again, you can see the definition: planning, implementation, and control activities to ensure that a golden version of contextual data values. Really good definition there. Each of the chapters in the DIMBOK has a context model like this, and this is a great place to start when you're looking at the DIMBOK and trying to figure out, there's a lot of dense information in there, but we put a lot of work into these context models, and they will give you some very specific guidance here. So what are the goals? To provide authoritative source of reconciled high quality master and reference data, lower cost and complexity through reuse and standardization, and supporting whatever types of consumable efforts, that exploitation things that you need to have. What are the inputs? We've got business drivers, et cetera, et cetera. We've got suppliers, we've got participants. All of those things are critically important. What do they do? Well, 10 key activities. I won't bother to read them to you, but again, you can do all of this on your own as far as working through these various bits and pieces here. What are the primary deliverables? Well, we've got, again, requirements from the process that come out. We've got different types of consumers that consume in different ways, and we've got various different metrics that we'd like to have. Again, quality control is one of the main operational ones, but again, reuse and overall overhead resources should be decreasing in value as you're working your way towards these. Each of these are going to be very important, but each of them are going to be important specifically to your organization. So you are best suited to provide this kind of guidance to your organizations. And I urge you to go back and just, if nothing else that you take away from this particular webinar, this one page here, I think provides a tremendous amount of guidance so that everybody can do this. Like I said, if you want to take that British Telecom little piece there, you are welcome to do that as well. I'd love to hear some of your stories. Again, reach out as you do this. The last piece is that there are tools. And yes, you could spend a lot of money on these various tools. In fact, your organization may in fact have something called master data management that you didn't know until today what it did or what it was attempting to do. But it's just overkill in many cases, particularly for organizations that are just starting out. And when you're just starting out, you just need a SQL Server database, and a little bit of discipline around how to build this type of thing, so that every time you go for this type of data, you know exactly where it's going to come from, and that you have already made sure that that data is of high quality, so that you're able to actually come up and deliver on what these various components are, what the business process needs. Again, if I go back to my example with the admitting privileges, if I set admitting privileges, but it requires you to wait 24 hours, and the physician happens to need access to the emergency department for emergency patients, 24 hours is not going to work. Now, don't worry, most master data management solutions don't make you last 24 hours, don't make you wait 24 hours to go into this stuff. But again, sometimes it's instantaneous, sometimes it's minutes. Again, you're the experts here. You guys know what best works for your organization and what you're going to be able to do in order to come up with all of this stuff. It's just a really fun way of going about and looking at how these things go. And again, you may look at this and say, oh, okay, well, that's great, but the part I need to work on is, one little piece of it over here, as opposed to the overall process. Again, different things are going to be important for different organizations. Well, I'm leaving you with a couple of references here. These will be included in with the PDF slides so that you can go out and take a look at all of these various bits and pieces here. And we are right about back at the top of the hour. So I will call Mark back up and see if we can answer some of your questions. Hopefully I've given you some good information here.
Boy, howdy, do we have a lot of questions, Peter, and
Oh my goodness.
some of these are going to lead into wonderful philosophical debates,
As we always do, Mark, as
as
we
we
always do.
always do. I'm sorting these by the most upvoted. So if you're out there in chat and you see a question that you're really excited about, toss it an upvote. But otherwise I'm going to go in order here. Um, could you please discuss the relationship between controlled vocabularies and business glossaries?
Hmm.
Hmm.
I tend to think of them as synonymous. Um, I used the example with tank a while ago. If I don't know what type of tank I'm talking about, it's going to be a problem. It's another
Mhm.
one. in the military that is called secure the building. And the joke is that if you secure the building with the Army, they go in and surround the building and lock up all the entrances. If you secure the building for the Navy, they turn out all the lights and leave the ship so that it's nice and tight and locked up and everybody can go to shore leave. If you're in the Marine Corps, they go in room by room and clear the facility and make sure that nobody can get in or out. And if you're securing the building for the Air Force, they sign a 3-year lease with an option to buy. Now, that's a little bit glib, but we all start out with the idea of making sure that we are all saying the same thing, or as Mark and I are both musicians, we're singing off the same sheet of music. And so consequently, that's what we're talking about. It's so important. And your management will understand this. You'll often hear, oh, the big breakdown is between IT and the business. Well, that's one type of breakdown. And if you're an analyst that can speak business and IT, that makes you a very valuable individual. But the glossary part is where we start to get things formal. Now we've got glossary, we've got a term data bank, we've got all sorts of data dictionary, encyclopedia. What we're trying to get to is to say, look, this is what we mean when we're saying this, whatever this happens to be. I think it's my modeling one that we do, Mark, where I have a couple different definitions of account and things. And it's just a diagram that the management put together and said, hey, this is what these things mean when we're talking about it. And the entire organization got more efficient because they all were talking different things. Now, that's, again, typical. You'll get a lot of people who want to get into very specific differences between what's the difference between a glossary and a common vocabulary and all that sort of thing. And I mentioned briefly in there, you do not need to spend money on this to do it. They taught me a trick at Nokia, which is a single web page with a good governing process around it can function really well as your controlled vocabulary, glossary, business glossary, term bank, whatever it is that you want to call it, but that everybody can get to it and it doesn't cost you a ton of money. What do you think, Mark?
Well, I love talking about this too, Peter, and you touched on a lot of things that I like to say. So if people are familiar with a couple of my talks, I do a talk called Four Simple Rules for Managing Your Teenage Data, and this actually comes up in that. And I like to remind people to call different things different things. And as a rule, and I put up a Princess Bride quote. So inconceivable, you keep using that word. I don't think it means what you think it means. But I am a big proponent of making sure we call different things, and making sure that things have a clear name, and then that we have taxonomies that make sense. So I really just reiterating what you're saying, Peter, and I completely agree with
And
your
just so you
approach
guys
there.
know, we don't always agree on these things, so we'll
Yeah,
get into
no.
some parts. Great question, though. Thanks for starting us off.
Yeah. So next up is what three components of the Dama wheel would you suggest to work together for reference and master data?
Well, I hate to turn the question back over to you, but I think that really does depend on what you're looking at. So let's give you a little context to this
I
thing.
was going to say it depends too, Peter.
Ah, where is it? Let me get to that page though, because it is. I really do think that's one thing we didn't do as well with the DIMBOK as we could have, is to say the idea of getting them together. So, and I think Mark, I've talked about this example before, where one time you'll get an organization that comes in and says, okay, well, in order to start this off here, you really need to do reference and master data, data quality, and data governance. And that seems to be a strong answer. But I've seen these things work this way, and then I've seen them, sort of go through a cycle on this and
Hmm.
still not have a problem all the way solved. And the next thing they do is they change the reference and master data management over to metadata management. And it's not that they are different entirely. Reference and master data is a form of metadata management. But perhaps if you're only looking at it from a reference and master data management perspective, you'll miss out on some of the broader implications of metadata management. By the way, we spelled metadata wrong there too. But that's all right. We won't harp on that. And then I've seen other organizations go all the way down to data warehousing and say, look, what we're really talking about here from our master data management is that we need this to be eventually part of a warehouse. I've seen other organizations where they have the wrong data model, and so they incorporate a wedge there as well. What do you think? How would you go about that one?
Yeah, you could get into any of these. So it really is going to depend on what your organization is doing. But yeah, data modeling, what does a customer look like? What does it even mean to be a customer? And what are the activities a customer does? Like that's all data modeling stuff. But data integration and interoperability, you were showing earlier, Peter, the system of all those or the diagram of all those systems that are storing what's going to become master data, all the systems of record that are coming together to make a golden record. Well, that's what data integration and interoperability is all about too. So there's so much there that it really depends on what your business outcomes are for master data, um, uh, such that what other data management activities or practices are we going to involve in this? Yeah, I love this diagram because
I think
everybody
one of
lives this. Everybody in chat
the,
lives
oh
this
boy.
life where they've got a whole bunch of systems and spreadsheets and stuff everywhere and data going back and forth between other amazingly ridiculously complex things that are just ridiculous and complex because of happenstance as opposed to architecture or design. Anyway, I'm starting to
You
get
know
on my
what's funny?
soapbox now.
That's all right. It's a good place to be. But one of the things that happens though is that I'll show this slide and somebody will come up and go, "Who gave you permission to reproduce our internal documentation?"
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
Exactly. This
I'm
happens
Houdini.
everywhere.
I could
Nobody in chat feel bad if this represents your organization.
absolutely.
I've seen this everywhere.
Uh, all right. Next question.
I love this question too. What are some of the best ways to store and access MDM and reference data, like from existing apps, for example?
You want to take this one?
Well, so
We're
I'm
good at
gonna
drawing pictures, right? What's actually goes
yeah,
into these
I'm
pictures?
going to admit something right off the hop here because I've failed spectacularly at this several times before I got it right. Nobody out there in the real world is as interested in reading your reference data or managing your master data as you are as the data as the person managing a master data management initiative. So really you've got to drive some business value and have some reasonably practicable steps and hit people with information where they're using it. So make it easy for people to find the golden record, compare to a golden record, make it easy for folks at time of data entry to benefit from a single source of truth, and you'll have more success. But it took me a lot of not doing a great job at this to really understand the nature of people's interaction with master data. Does that make sense, Peter? Does that kind of
It
line
does.
up? Yeah.
Yeah. And while the Chat GPT recommends these things, or Gemini, I guess in this case recommends these are vendors that have good track records, and
Mm-hmm.
we've partnered with all of them on various occasions in there. But I wouldn't, without knowing anything more about your organization, say that one of these would be better than the other one.
Well, yeah, it
Again,
depends what you're doing with MDM, right? Like you can't, like you said earlier on an earlier slide, a fool with a tool is still a fool. You have to have a sense of what your business goals and objectives are before you drop money on what you want MDM to solve. Is your MDM writing back into source systems? Is your MDM just a hub and spoke integration? Like all these different solutions are going to solve those things differently.
and that strategy component is so critical. I see so many organizations that implement separate from strategy. And that's just very unfortunate because you put something together like this and say this is what Peter said the architecture should be. It's like, no, this is a starting point for you to think about how this could be part of your solution. But you've
Mhm.
got to go a lot more analysis in there before you go in and say, build me one of those, right? Because it may not be the right type of an access.
Yeah, exactly. We've got another philosophy question a little bit here. This is
Oh
a
boy.
good thing that I've got a philosophy minor, right? Um, Peter, I've seen the following definitions long ago. What do you think of them? Reference data as lists, pick lists controlled by external sources, countries, country codes, postal codes, currencies, units of measure, etc. You obtain them from organization that sets and owns these lists. Master data, lists of things or entities of interest to the enterprise, controlled by the enterprise. So people, places, things, etc. You identify them and list them by studying your business.
Yeah, no
Yeah, thanks for bringing
disagreement
this
there.
slide up.
Yeah. No,
Yeah,
we go through these ideas to say that the capabilities of our systems are going to be controlled. So again, put yourself in an entrepreneur situation where you're building a great new product, and you've got a website that you're going to put it out there, and you're like, well, I could make it multi-language, or I could make it just speak one language. And for expediency or whatever other reason, or maybe your web designer doesn't know how to do multi-language, you build it with one language. Well, if you have one language, building that second language into the website is going to be much more difficult. Whereas, and that's sort of the example of reference data, right? What countries do we do business in? If I don't put in there that I'm going to put any sort of country code in there at all, how am I going to go differentiate the stuff that goes? I had a piece of mail that was shipped from the UK to my house today, even though I'm in Venice, right? But I was able to get a message from the Royal Mail that said, hey, we received this, we're getting ready to put it out, and it's on an airplane now. So, or maybe it's a boat, I don't know which way it goes. But if you didn't have that capability, it limits the ability of what you're going to do in there. So read that reference definition again, Mark.
it was lists, pick lists controlled by external sources. So things like country codes, postal codes, currencies, units of measure. You obtain them from the organization that sets and owns these data lists.
By
So
the way,
like
that's a
ISO country
real
codes.
exactly. I was headed there, right? Because we've all seen this. Again, I use the example of Great Britain versus UK, but even among standards, there are different ways of representing countries. So you have to figure out which one you're going to use.
100%.
Whatever you do, don't talk to management about this.
Yeah. Well,
because
and
they go ahead.
reference data can get really tricky too because of the timeliness aspect of it. So
Mm-hmm.
somebody else is controlling and owning the sets of that data. But what about, like, look at country codes when you look at the Czech Republic versus Czechia? So from a certain point of time, yeah, there's a country called the Czech Republic. It doesn't exist anymore. We've got Czechia. So what does that mean? And from the context of different um, countries as well, like we call it the Gulf of Mexico or the Gulf of America, or we call
Oh
it
my God, don't
Taiwan
start
as a
that.
country, or Taiwan isn't a country, depending on your point of view. So like the reference data sets become fascinating weird things to manage, and the organization you get them from can determine whether it's fit for purpose for your business goals, right?
Just so you all know, Mark is Canadian and I'm obviously not. And so we've agreed that this is an elbows free zone for the duration of this. But we'll put our elbows back up after we get done with this, right, Mark?
I'm nothing if not
Just
polite.
exactly. Just kidding.
Sorry, bud.
Yep. Well, you know what ours is, bless your heart, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Did we lose everybody? No.
I think people are giggling at us in chat. I can't quite see the chat fly by.
Yeah.
Very good. To what extent um, any organization needs to involve domain architects, so information and data architects, to carry out reference and master data management duties? Um, is it not more of a business domain duty? I think there's a couple aspects to this question, but I'm interested to
Go
hear your
ahead.
thoughts, Peter.
Well, I would imagine that depending on context, again, it's going to be important to understand when to bring in the right type of expertise. I remember some work we were doing for USAID many years ago, where we had to have some answers to some very specific questions, and they said, "Oh, we have people that answer those questions because they work in all around the world, and they had experts that understood context for the various bits and pieces of the questions that were asked." But again, other parts it may not be quite as important for it. So you hate to say it depends too many times, but there are certainly areas where the domain expertise is going to be really critical. There's certain times where the domain for the tool expertise is going to be very critical. I've gone into some organizations where their MDM system was they were working, but it wasn't working correctly, and they really needed sort of a tuning aspect of it. And the tuning was we had to first get permission to be able to change the processes. And that did require some very specific domain expertise and even some union representation in some of those discussions, just to make sure we didn't trip over any inadvertent landmines that were out there in the space. But go ahead, Mark, jump in too.
Well, I'm going to agree with you again here, which is boring for our studio audience.
Yeah, sorry.
But it really does depend. Like, like I do want to kind of zero in on is it not more of a business domain duty? One thing I like to say, Peter, and maybe you disagree with this, like from a data quality perspective, but this is also true for master data and working with master data. Like a data quality program, like the manager of a data quality program, fixes no data quality issues. It's really the business that remediates, and the program itself is there to provide the tools and processes and project planning for prevention and remediation of data quality issues. Similar with master data management, it's the business that's driving and benefiting from something like Customer 360, a single source of truth of understanding of customer records. And it's really kind of maintained and managed by the business directly, not the trappings of a master data management initiative. That just gives you the tools and procedures and policies and guidelines for people to do that work, right? So
Yep.
it's the folks out in the business that are at the ground level interacting with, using, and benefiting from the data, right?
Mm-hmm. And the reason I agree with you, particularly on that, is because that's also where you're going to get your best cost measurement. If you have somebody from outside the domain that's trying to cost out on something like this, whereas you have somebody with the domain expertise who says, look, if I do this one, not only do I lose the sale, but I also lose 3 additional sales because this particular customer was a market leader. So everybody waited to see what the market leader bought before they went in and buy something else. So you didn't just screw up just one sale, you screwed up 3 sales as a result of it. So, absolutely.
Yeah, and that's why for a lot of these kinds of initiatives, I like to have representation from people across the business who have a tangential relationship to data. Like we could be working on something critical like customer email because we do a lot of email marketing campaigns. We have a determined ROI on the number of email we set out. This is how many returns we expect to get. If we improve email address and don't misname our customers and things like that, then this is our expectation. But as a side benefit to that, then our salespeople have a better ability to contact customers and make more sales. So I want to hear those stories too from a master data management perspective as to how much more efficiently people are working with data because of initiatives that we've taken to deal with specific problems.
Super, super. I love it,
Um,
as Shannon would say, right?
yeah, yeah. Can you comment on the trend towards data decentralization and having a central repository for master reference data? Ooh, this is interesting.
So one of the reasons we get this sort of centralized versus decentralized back and forth is because people try it one way and they figure it doesn't work in order to do that. But the key here is, let me just go back to these couple diagrams here, whether we're talking about reference or whatever, the key to reference and master data is that you can't have multiple sources of reference without a good, valid reason for it. And ideally, you may end up replicating those databases of record in the organization for some technical reasons. You may have to have country separation or something like that that forces it to be in that type of a component. But the key is that this piece of it has to be centralized, and it almost doesn't matter what the rest of it is. But once you centralize it, once people see it can be centralized, then they'll see, oh, wow, would it be helpful then if I did this with this as well? Or would, again, could you do that to this? Right. And they come up with different ideas. So once you show them sort of the way, they'll start to go, oh, that does make sense. It's kind of like showing somebody a spoken hub model the first time. For spoken hub, everything has to connect to everything else. And now with spoken hub, everything only has to connect to the hub. And the only time you need to add anything different is when you're adding a new type of interface to the system. Every other thing is just a replication of an existing capability. So people look at that and go, huh, I wonder why we didn't build it that way in the first place. Well, nobody ever has that luxury, right?
Yeah. I agree with you 100%. I think there's a little bit of path of least resistance that happens there. We're dropping something in, so and I need it to connect to this, so we're just going to connect to that, and then you kind of get the spaghetti over time.
Mm-hmm. And again, a lot of people don't know that that's necessarily bad. They don't understand the real complexities that are involved in trying to maintain,
Hmm.
that much really complex data on it. I mean, when you get into Salesforce, for example, which is obviously a master data management solution for CRM, people just, oh, sure, I just put in Salesforce. It's great. It's in the cloud. Everybody uses it. What could be a problem, right? Well, it's a fairly complex system, and there's
Yeah,
a lot to
as many
learn.
organizations find out over time, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, we're paying our license fee, but um, in practice, what are some ways you've seen master data management translate to impactful, measurable KPIs?
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, I love
So
this question too. Yeah. Our chat, you're killing it
you,
today. So many
yeah,
good
really,
questions.
absolutely. You want to go first? I've got a good one that I can add, but you go first if you want to.
There's so many cool things you can do with showing direct ROI for master data management. I love being able to talk about effective donation campaigns because I've worked in higher ed so long, Peter, as you know,
Mhm.
working with alumni organizations that are contacting students who have achieved a degree at your organization to ask them for a donation for your school. Like there's a direct path to show that, hey, we've mastered this data. We understand the best contact information for these folks. We're able to contact more people. Out of the people that we contact, this is how much money we get because of this system that's in place. We expected the next donation drive to reach out to this many more people, which should have a dollar value of X. Like it's something that's tangible that you can calculate and you can show that, hey, an improvement of records is going to equal an improvement of this dollar figure. So I like following a KPI of, this is the amount of records that we've improved, this is the amount of records that we've mastered, because you can attach it to dollars, and that's going to make somebody with a pocketbook excited, which is going to lead to you either maintaining or getting new resources.
Absolutely. Great example. And if your mission around that isn't dollar related, then it's going to be related to saving puppies or, reducing global warming or whatever that is that you can come up with. My favorite example on the master data score is that I have a cousin named Fred who was the number one salesperson for one of the large food groups. And he would always catch up with me when we catch up and have a beer sort of thing. I'd asked him, are you still doing the same thing, Fred? Yep, absolutely. Still doing the same thing. He would work 4 days a week, sell like crazy. He loves selling. He's really good at it. Number one salesperson for them. But on Friday, he stayed the entire day at home because his sales system that he used was different from the one that they had. They had an SAP system in there, and he had to take the entire day Friday to translate his reference and master data into the stuff that the SAP system could use because it was too difficult to change the SAP system to do it. And he said they would have gotten instantly 20% more sales out of me if they had gotten rid of this, but nobody ever bothered to say, was that, worth this type of an investment, or would it maybe even have been worthwhile to buy him a little assistant that would have been able to buy him an intern so they can get all of this stuff. But he said, I worked my butt off for them 4 days a week. And on the fifth day of the week, I sat around and did administrative overhead because they had the wrong types of codes that they would use. And I had to go back and manually change all these codes from X to Y, and it was just the silliest thing, and it ran on for 20 years. So, 20 years of 20% improved sales, I think that's a pretty easy thing to measure. By the way, I have a book on this topic that you might look up. It's called Monetizing Data Management, and they're not all MDM examples, but there's enough in there that I think you'll find some things that might seem familiar for you. A little plug in there for
Yeah, for one of your books, yeah.
yeah.
I'm trying to find the next question here. Kind of lost a little bit of visibility in my Q&A.
At least you can see it. I can't see anything.
What role should be responsible for collision rules when there are multiple non-golden sources? How high is it reasonable to go? So I guess like survivorship rules, Peter.
Well, if you are the World Bank and your collision rule is who gets the check for X number of $1 billion to build the third terminal at the Egyptian International Cairo Airport, which is a business process that they had, it needs to go all the way to the top. And they did. By the way, they have world-class reference and master data practices that run out of that shop, because handing the check to the wrong person or the wrong bank account, right? They don't actually do checks anymore, would be a very, very costly mistake in there. On the other hand, if you're going to have arguments over lots of little nit noise stuff that really doesn't matter, then you're down at the other end of the spectrum. So once again, we'll toss that back over to you guys as the experts who have to figure out what the value of this is. If there's a system for resolving arbitrage or resolving collisions, that's great. I would hope that it was applied in a way that was profitable. And I mean that not in the sense of, making money, but in the sense that it was worth you get more out of it than you put into it, right? Because if you're putting more into it than you get out of it, it's probably not working.
Yeah, well, this reminds me of when I was working with an identity management at one organization, higher ed again, where we're collecting person data from a student information system, a library system, an alumni donation system, like all of these different systems that have people data in them. And the ways that we survive various columns of data as we merge these entities together was always unique and interesting. So this is where, and Peter, when you talk about data owners, and you're like, please don't use that word. This is almost a great example of that. I still use the term data owner because it's easy to describe and talk about somebody's accountability for data at an organization. But ultimately, you're right. Don't let that term imply something that we're not meaning to imply. So by all means, call it something else. We're really talking about what people are working on, right? Or what people are accountable for.
A
And
fiduciary responsibility.
yeah, I've heard somebody use the term data investor, like who's the investor for this data? I'm like, well, okay, that's interesting. But ultimately, there's folks at your organization that are accountable for those silos of data. And when we're creating that single source of truth for a person, what is the best contact information? What are the rules going to be when we're comparing contact information from multiple systems? Those are discussions that need to happen, and that's where you leverage parts of your data governance practice to broker those and to collaborate on those kinds of things. So it depends, but I mean, it's going to be different, and you're going to have a committee of folks who are accountable for those different silos of data that are all coming together in one source, I think. Peter, what do you think?
No, I certainly agree.
Yeah. Uh,
It's very, very short and simple.
that's all we have time for. We're running out of time, Peter.
Oh dear.
And you're right. We always do have fun with Q&A, and thank you so much for chat for putting so much content into Q&A. Like I've got you on one screen. I literally can't read everything anymore because there's so much stuff. So thank you everybody for all the wonderful questions. And everybody, thank you for joining us. We'll have the recording out within a couple of business days along with the slides. And we'll see you all next time, I hope. Thank you again. Thanks again, Peter.
Have a great day, everybody. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.